Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's online talk with Mitch Horowitz about his most recent book, Practical Magick. Got a copy right here, presented by the Philosophical Research Society. My name is Kristen. I'm an event manager at PRS. I'm very excited to have Mitch back for another event, another talk. Just want to share a little bit about the Philosophical Research Society before I hand things over to Mitch. We were founded in 1934 by Manly P. Hall. Manly was a seeker first and foremost. He was an author, a prolific writer, lecturer, public speaker. He's the author of The Secret Teachings of All Ages. That's probably his most famous work. And he founded the Philosophical Research Society, which is located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. We've been around for 91 years, going strong. These days, we are a very busy, very active arts and events nonprofit. We host a wide variety of events every month. We have a lot of in-person events here at PRS, and then we also have these online events, and we have hybrid events that are both in person and on Zoom at the same time. So if you are in Los Angeles, live in Los Angeles, or happen to be passing through, we would love for you to pay us a visit. Our entire calendar is available online at prs.org. We also have a really amazing research library here with about 30,000 esoteric books in it. It's really fantastic. So yes, if you're passing through, please do check us out. And yeah, if you're interested, if you're not in Los Angeles and want to see more, participate in more of our online events, you can find more information about that as well at prs.org. So we are very excited to have Mitch back. I'm really looking forward to, I have not had a chance to read this book yet, but I've got a copy and I'm really looking forward to cracking it open very soon. Mitch is one of today's most acclaimed voices of esoterica, parapsychology, and the unexplained. He's a PEN Award-winning historian whose books also include Occult America, The Miracle Club, Daydream Believer, Modern Occultism, Happy Warriors, and now Practical Magick. So I think without any further ado, I'm going to hand things over to Mitch so we can get started. Mitch Horowitz, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Kristen. Thank you very much. And I'm very appreciative of your introduction and stewardship of the event. And also a shout out to my friend Sarah Alessandrini, who is the tech maestro who makes everything run well at PRS. And I'm very glad to be collaborating with you all again. And I was also especially glad to hear Kristen's um, description of Manly P. Hall first and foremost as a seeker. And I think it's so important that we retain and emphasize that word. I wouldn't be doing the work I am doing today if it weren't for the example of Manly P. Hall. He was probably the first person through the influence of the secret teachings of all ages who made me understand that historicism of the metaphysical and writing about the metaphysical and the mystical, both in history and in practice, could be a vocation in itself. It had not occurred to me that any such thing was possible. Certainly, no such thing is at least in my younger years was possible within academia, a path I chose not to take, and discovering an independent seeker like Manly P. Hall who was writing in areas of history, practice, and also curating esoteric verities and ideas, and doing so again as a full-time vocation calling. It meant the world to me to discover that, and I wish that very same thing for each and every one of you, if you haven't found that already, uh, on this program tonight. And I'm very grateful to everybody for. I'm saying tonight, of course, I'm in the East Coast. I'm very grateful to everybody for joining in this program and for supporting Practical Magick, which just published several days ago. I've been gratified by the response, and it's especially gratifying because when I set out to write this book, I really felt spent. I didn't know or feel that I had it in me to complete this book. It's based on a course that I delivered about 3 years ago under the auspices of the Theosophical Society, and it was a six-part course, and it was a significant undertaking because as a manager at the Theosophical Society in America had said to me at under the Theosophical Society's auspices since its inception. The society always had an uneasy relationship with magic and practical occultism, what might be called spell working, magical operations, because Madame Blavatsky's interests, it seems to me, um, starting in the late 1870s, went more and more in the direction of the Vedic religions, specifically Hinduism and Buddhism. And she and Colonel Olcott immersed themselves very deeply in these traditions and I think wrestled with the classical tenets of Vedic tradition that saw outer life as samsara or maya or illusion. And there was a lesser emphasis placed on the Hermetic arts, which, while not in any way contradictory to the Vedic point of view, did tend to place greater emphasis, perhaps, on the agency and development of the individual in the world as we find it. So there was not within the framework of theosophical thought hostility to magic by no means. There was not hostility by any means to Hermeticism or like philosophies in the Western esoteric tradition, but they weren't the emphasis. They weren't the emphasis that Blavatsky and then later Mrs. Besant and others, I think, staked their work on. So that course was a good experience, and it was an unusual experience within the context of Theosophy. I also found that the structure I brought to that course, which was a six-part structure, was proving very disruptive as I attempted to write the book. And I really hit a roadblock at a certain point. My intention had been to take the transcripts from the course and massage them, revise them, edit them into a proper narrative book. And anybody who's ever attempted that effort is aware that there is a very strange but deep chasm between the spoken and the written word, even though the spoken word, historically and in terms of human development, precedes the written word. As infants, we make noise right away. We cry to signal distress and so forth. And with time comes language skills, and then with time comes writing skills. And one of the reasons why I'm absolutely convinced that virtually anyone can learn to write well is that the written word is derivative of the spoken word. Again, that's true in terms of human history, and that's true in terms of individual development. And yet, for that verity, there's a weird distance and gap between the spoken and the written word, which may have to do with the fact that even here, in this two-dimensional experience of communicating together over Zoom, there's facial expression, there's intonation, there's body language. There are so many more signals that can be brought to the effort of communication that are lost as soon as presentations are reduced to the cold symbols of of the page or of the screen. And I knew it was going to be a tough task to transform written into spoken, I beg your pardon, spoken into written word, but it became more than tough. I found myself almost feeling bled dry of energy and material to bring that I needed to completely throw out that six-part structure and allow the material to determine the structure rather than this inviolate vessel of the material. And I suspect this is a reckoning that a lot of you tonight have experienced, and it's important to pay attention to it. When you're dealing with a problem in life, whether it's a piece of writing that's not going well, whether it's a job that's not going well, whether it's a relationship that's not going well, whether it's a living situation that's not going well, go back to premises. Go back to premises because sometimes, as jarring as it can be, we need to shatter the vessel and then restart because it seems to me that the vessel sometimes can be the problem. It's not that you don't have the ideas, the solutions, the outlook, the values, but the vessel can be the problem. And it can be very scary to shatter a vessel because we think a vessel is going to make things easier. A foreordained vessel is going to make things easier. I've always wanted this kind of job. I've always wanted to be married to this kind of person. Whatever it is. We derive a sense of safety from the vessel and we don't want to give it up. But the shattering of the vessel is sometimes the only thing that will allow you to move forward. And that was certainly my experience with this book. Once I shattered that vessel, everything began to go well. And the responses to the book have been very gratifying. And they would be gratifying under any circumstance because presumably we all want to do a good job. But the fact that I felt so stuck at a certain point brought a certain poignancy to the matter that I was able to get past that. And I'll say one last thing about the writing process. You know, sometimes you have to do your best work under the gun. My publisher very graciously gave me a book contract not long after the completion of the course that I was doing, and he was very accommodating of me. In the interim, I participated in hosting a television show on Discovery Max called Alien Encounters, and that completely interrupted my writing schedule. And my publisher was very giving and positive, and and it reached a certain point where he said to me, "You're delivering this book," you know. So his dictum also provided me with the urgency to think long and hard about these issues. I see some questions coming up about the writing of the book, and I'm going to make time for exchange following the talk. And you can put those in either the chat or the question box, and Kristen will read them, and I will address them. So that's a little bit of a background on the process of writing this book and how it came to be and a lesson I derived from it. I always set out for this book to be a complete amalgam of the historical and the practical, with an emphasis on the practical, obvious in the title. And my North Star in terms of the ideas in the book versus the process of writing the book was a statement made by the legendary occultist and rocket scientist Jack Parsons towards the end of his life in 1952. Jack was a remarkable intellect, as many of you are aware. From his Pasadena headquarters, he not only became one of the most notable figures in mid-century rocket science, contributing to the founding of the Jet Propulsion Labs, who some speculate that Jack is memorialized in the initials of JPL for Jack Parsons Labs rather than Jet Propulsion Labs. I have no evidence of that, but it's a mythos that I like. But Jack was very distinguished as an engineer and as a rocket scientist. He was also, and for similar reasons, very distinguished as a working occultist. He came to believe, I think, very rightly and very correctly, as I'll allude to a little bit later in our talk, that some of humanity's earliest philosophies, including astrology, alchemy, spell work, prediction, prophecy, had embedded within them a kind of proto-science in which following certain methods led to certain repeat and inevitable outcomes. Now, I'm not entirely sure magic is always that way. Magic occurs, but it occurs amid many different laws and forces under which we live, and I see no reason to assume that magic, which I define as causative ritual, is exempt from the circumstances facing every other natural law, which is that there are myriad countervailing forces that impact it. We could say gravity is a natural law. It's ever operative, which is certainly true, but obviously gravity is affected by mass. You're going to experience gravity very differently here on Earth than you will on the moon or Jupiter. Water is always H2O. It's a natural law. You combine those elements, you get water. But it could be vapor, it could be solid, it could be liquid. Again, depending upon vibration of molecules, depending upon temperature. And you'll experience water as a completely different substance, whether it's the warm water of a natural spring or it's permafrost in the soil of the planet Mars. They're both water. But Jack, I think, very shrewdly understood that the attempt at methodology that ancient men and women were always attempting through the so-called magical arts were our sciences, of course, were our proto-sciences. There is no difference between astrology and astronomy to the ancients. In fact, mathematics itself, Pythagorean mathematics, to which Manly P. Hall dedicates two brilliant chapters, arguably, in my estimation, his best chapters in Secret Teachings of All Ages, were an attempt to divine the code of the universe, the wish of Pythagoras and the great Egyptian architects and founders of geometry was to unlock the golden mean, unlock the code of creation, and bring that code to bear on our earthly habitations and monuments, from the pyramid to the great uh, megaliths and structures of Rome and Greece, and obviously other civilizations, including Mayan and Vedic civilizations, shamanic civilizations around the world, from Polynesia to Siberia, had the same points of view. It's a universal perspective. So the magical arts and the sciences were not distinctive from one another in antiquity. They were the same thing. And Jack very shrewdly understood that very early in his career. And as such, he wanted to recreate the ancient arts and see if they worked, like a true scientist should do. And in many respects, I think he found that they did work. But he was also plagued by suffering in his life. First of all, he lost his security clearance from the United States government, so he couldn't work very much in the aerospace industry towards the end of his life. He had been a Marxist when he was younger, and when he was older, he was more of a libertarian, but the fact that he had been a Marxist at one time was a mark of Cain on him as the World War II era faded and the Cold War era kicked in. He was very, very agonized, as anybody would be, by the lack of that security clearance. He had suffered betrayal by pretended friends, specifically one L. Ron Hubbard, who found his way to Jack's door in a residence, a group residence that Jack maintained in Pasadena called the Parsonage. And Hubbard seemed to be one of these people who would immediately repel or attract. Lots of people would meet him and think, oh, I want to get away from this guy immediately. This is an untrustworthy guy who seems to exude a kind of hostility, bullying, monkey-brained dominance. And other people, like Jack, were very attracted to him, and they believed his stories, and they believed his intentions. And so Hubbard and Jack collaborated on some magical operations, some of which are quite famous. Hubbard lived in Jack's home and the culminating experience of the hospitality and the generosity that Jack showed to Hubbard was Hubbard making off with his girlfriend, his money, his life savings, and fleeing to Miami, where he was going to engage in some scheme of buying and flipping yachts. Not exactly what you're looking for in a house guest. So Jack had lost the friendship and suffered the betrayal of somebody who he had welcomed under his roof. He also lost the mentorship by that juncture of the aged Aleister Crowley. Um, Crowley grew disgusted with the relationship between Jack and Hubbard. And Crowley at the time, of course, was living in England and was only corresponding with Jack um, through letters. And Jack was also sending money to keep him afloat. And uh, Crowley was already dead by the time of some of the events I'm going to describe, but he was around for a time in which Hubbard had sidled up to Jack, and he was still sharp in his wits well into his aged years. Crowley, even from letters alone, immediately identified Hubbard as nothing but a troublemaker, and Crowley wrote to his German deputy, a man named Karl Germer, who had survived the experience of being sentenced to a concentration camp during World War II because of his activities on behalf of Crowley. And he said to Germer, who was living and who remarkably survived, he said, these goats are fairly driving me crazy with their idiocy and their foolishness, and I can't believe Jack is not seeing through Hubbard. And it's rather interesting how Crowley was so sharp right up until the very end, even from the distance of written correspondence. He knew this is a troublemaker. And Jack didn't listen. And as a result, Crowley pretty much washed his hands of Jack. Jack was removed from mentorship, leadership at the branch of the OTO that he was leading in Los Angeles. And he felt very disappointed in Crowley. He felt Crowley didn't stand by him in his time of crisis. So he resigned entirely from the OTO, and I suppose you could say he rejected Crowley as much as Crowley rejected him. So here was a man who lost his security clearance to do his work, who had been betrayed by someone who he saw as a confidant and friend, who had lost the mentorship of his valued and now dead um, teacher, and he was casting around for a new way of doing things. And Jack started more and more to write, and he wrote to his wife Marjorie Cameron the following words: "Every idea war that has ever been won in human history has been won through the principle of simplicity. And at this point, magic does not have it." Soon after writing those words, Jack himself died. He was killed in a pyrotechnics explosion in his garage laboratory. His wife, Cameron, thought he was murdered. Others deemed Jack's death an accidental due to accidentally blowing himself up through pyrotechnics that he was creating for a Hollywood special effects company. Again, he was not able to work as an engineer, at least at the level that he had been, so he had to take on jobs, catch as catch can, for money. I was very haunted by those words of Jack, and they reached me as a reader, as a seeker, as an admirer of the man, um, probably about 2 generations following his death. And my wish in writing Practical Magick was to pursue that thread of simplicity that Jack felt was missing from magic. It spoke to my heart because as a seeker, I have felt, perhaps as some of you have, an aversion to the thickness, the liturgy, the ceremony, the complexity of certain magical rituals. I'm going to say more about this. It seems to me the magical moment is a moment of passion. And the irony of magic and of all traditional religion, it seems to me, is that ceremony, song, hymn, prayer, liturgy, the congregational experience, that is used to drum up passion. But for me, and maybe for some of you, it bleeds passion. I don't respond to it. I grew up as a child in a traditional Jewish household. I had an Orthodox bar mitzvah. I abide the beauty and the historicity of that very dense traditional liturgy, practice, ceremony, prayer. But by my early 30s, it left me very cold, and I fled from it. I fled from it. Um, Sometimes I joke with people, oh, it's only half a joke. If you're an occultist and you like complex liturgy, become an Orthodox Jew. You'll be very happy. There's lots of it there. But it wasn't for me. It wasn't for me. And it was odd in a way because Crowley, he captured so much in the way of this wild, impassioned breaking through the paradigm of ordinary intellect and ordinary life. You see that in his channeled text, the Book of the Law, which was channeled across 3 days in Cairo in April of 1904. These sessions that made up the Book of the Law, arguably the most influential occult book ever written, they were just 1 hour sessions. They were very brief. And yet later in Crowley's career, he opted for the very thick liturgy and memorization. Some of it very beautiful. Some of it, I think, received from a higher source of intellect. But again, for me, very disrupting of the passion, the urgency that I think is at the heart of the magical appeal. And so earlier in my career, for example, and this continues today, I've always been very interested in New Thought, the mind causation philosophy, for the very reasons I'm describing, for its very heterodox simplicity. I don't care for the theistic language that it employs. That's not my point of view. Abrahamic language, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, today, that is not my point of view. There's a childishness sometimes in New Thought, and I've suffered that, and I've critiqued that. And yet, that every day, every man and every woman metaphysics seem to me to harbor within it some of that employment of passion that I thought was being bled out of magic through density of ceremony. So that's that's among the reasons Jack's statement reached me so deeply and so fully. And so I set myself the task in the book of boiling down the constituent elements of magic to their core essentials. And in this talk, I'm going to give you several exercises to attempt, if you wish, that I think abide these core elements of magic, which I'm going to describe in just a moment. Before I get onto that more practical side of our talk, and I would say the book follows this same pattern, I want to make another note about history. It seems to me that magic, what I define as causative ritual, has been present in the human situation from time immemorial. And I would go one step further, and I'm going to explain this very carefully. The magical effort is part of pre-human history as well, by which I mean it is part of the life and the culture of pre-sapiens, of Neanderthal beings, Neanderthal men and women. Not exactly human, very, very close in nature to us. They are our closest ancestors on the evolutionary chain, but they are Homo neanderthalis. They are simian. They are pre-sapiens. They were different from us. Very close, but different. They had a different skeletal structure. They had a different uh, cranium structure. They had a different gait. They very possibly, we don't really know, presumably mated with Homo sapiens, and here we are today. But that's theoretical. What we do know, what we do know, is that Neanderthal men and women, the last of whom seem to have died out about 40,000 years ago, did have a spirituality, a magical spirituality that we 21st century people would recognize as such. Now, dig this. We've only known about the existence of our Neanderthal ancestors since the mid 19th century, not very long ago. And since that time, archaeologists affiliated with museums, universities, and so forth have discovered that Neanderthal men and women produced what could be described as talismans. Talismans. These might be eagle talons or bear claws that were worn as necklaces, just as I'm wearing right now. And these things are presumed to have been petitions for help in the hunt. This was a hunter-gatherer society, and the hunt and the success of the hunt was the dividing line between life and death, not only for individuals, but for entire communities. They also had, and this is mind-blowing to me, and you can see pictures of this online. We have hundreds of them. They fashioned little statuettes, maybe about 4 inches high, something like that. Little statuettes in a bulbous female form, not looking at all like Neanderthals as we understand them, because in a hunter-gatherer society, you didn't have overfed people. I can assure you that. And so these figurines are in a bulbous feminine form with pendulous breasts and a large middle, suggestive of a pregnant woman. And in the mid 19th century, archaeologists started calling these things Venus figurines. Of course, Venus being a goddess that wasn't emergent for many in the form that we recognize, was not emergent until many, many millennia later, but tens of millennia later. But this being the mid 19th century, Victorian age or near Victorian age, scientists term these statuettes Venus figurines. We have hundreds of them in museums and universities around the world. And it's presumed that these were fertility talismans. Again, very different in appearance from men and women in a hunter-gatherer society who were, if anything, underfed and undernourished a lot of the time. And the Venus figurines are such a wild departure. They remind me a little bit of those beautiful, big, chubby statues of Buddha or Budai that started to appear in the 11th century in China. The big grinning Buddha, fat, happy, as a symbol of good luck. They were not dissimilar. They were not dissimilar. And the presumption that these were fertility statues demonstrates that even our pre-human ancestors sought petitionary relationships with extraphysical entities. I was going to say non-human intelligences, but the Neanderthals were non-human intelligences. and shows you can't use these words too fast and easy. And I was so moved by this, I cried, when I first discovered this fact, because think of it. Think of it. Here we are meeting over some sort of digital magic of zeros and ones arranged in a particular order. Talk about magic in the 21st century. And stuff that we do. I'll bet half of you are wearing talismanic necklaces, is identifiable in our pre-human ancestors. What a beautiful, beautiful connection. What a beautiful, beautiful connection. And it seems to me that what this tells us, in addition to the intrinsic connections between life forms on our planet, bipedal life forms at least, and probably all life forms, what this tells us is not only that we had a shared set of interests, but it validates the spiritual appeal, the extra physical appeal, as revelatory and true. Because it can't just be a matter of social conditioning, right? Neanderthal men and women had a very different set of cultural concerns, social concerns, than we do, or than our ancestors in antiquity even did. And it can't just be brain biology, the oft-heard argument that it's just this and that neurological area lighting up in the brain, which I think fails on several levels, but this adds a historical failure, which is that presumably Neanderthal men and women had a different brain chemistry than we do. They certainly had a different atmosphere in which intellect functioned, and they had a different sized cranium. Their brain biology was different. It's simply a fact. So it can't just be conditioning or TED Talk style brain biology. I swore I'd never get one of these TED Talk headsets, but I gave in. I was asked to improve the sound, so I gave in. But that's as far as TED Talk stuff is going to go on this presentation. The whole neuroscience is destiny thing doesn't explain spirituality, and it fails on several levels. But it fails historically, and I work as a historian because we're seeing activity among our Neanderthal ancestors that is so like our own. It's uncanny. It's uncanny. And if you trace the magical effort through later stages of antiquity, it's ubiquitous. You find it in scripture. One of the things I read about in the book is that in the book of Exodus, in the Hebrew Bible, one of the earliest books of the Hebrew Bible, Joseph, who was supposed to be a Class A dream interpreter, gains the favor of Pharaoh, who elevates Joseph to his prime minister. And the passage reads that as Joseph's chariot would ride through public areas, Egyptian subjects would come running out before the chariot, and they might bend on their knee and yell, "Abrek, abrek!" And we don't know what the word abrek means. It seems to be probably an early form of what we would understand as the term blessing in Arabic. The term for blessing is, you might say, Barak, like Barack Obama, or in Hebrew, the term for blessing is brucha, very close to a brek and barak, brucha. And it seems to me, and I trace out the etymology best as I'm capable in Practical Magick, that this mysterious term abrek, which everybody agrees we don't know the meaning of, is probably the root not only of Barak and Baruch, but of abracadabra. Abracadabra, our most common magical term throughout history, now obviously used as a stage term, but that's probably the root. It's probably rooted in that ancient Aramaic or Egyptian word. And this is so widely true. I've mentioned that, or at least alluded that the root of our word chemistry is alchemy. Alchemy is probably and quite possibly a term for ancient Egypt itself. Um, the term Egypt is a Hellenic um, interpretation, mishmash, more or less, of how Egypt referred to itself. Egypt referred to itself through the hieroglyphic characters KMT or Kemet, Kemet, and Al is an Aramaic Arabic word for out of or joined to. It's very possible that the term alchemy, uh, and there are instances in which Egyptian terms that ended with what we would call a hard consonant were changed into a softer vowel by Hellenic cultures. Alchemy, alchemet, is probably out of or from Egypt, the Black Land, as Egyptians referred to themselves. So the very use of the term chemistry in our culture is homage, unknown homage, in a certain sense to our ancient ancestors in Mother Egypt. It's quite remarkable. I go through these things because we take language, language travels, pronunciations change, and the roots are forgotten. But when the roots are forgotten, so are our roots forgotten. So are our roots forgotten. So I'm very enchanted with all of these connections between our contemporary world and the world of the ancients and even the pre-ancients, primeval history, prehistory in the form of our Neanderthal ancestors. The magical operation, as I've been describing it, the petition to the extraphysical, the act of causative ritual is older than the human story itself. Older than the human story itself. It's basic. It's basic to the human situation. And I go through some of this history and more in the book because I think we need to know the ground we're standing on. But it also seems to me that everything that I have been describing in terms of magical acts and petitionary appeals has at its back a certain energy, a certain energy which I believe has been referred to in both ancient and more modern literature in an oblique way, usually through indirect terms or words. And that energy, as I see it, is sexuality, is the sexual urge. And I think you find that encrypted in a way into language that we've come to use, which is why I've been spending a little time talking about the etymology of certain words. And as we lose track of the etymology of words, we lose track of meaning itself. I think that the sexual urge has been described in different, sometimes more benign language, depending on culture, throughout the ages. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great idealist, philosopher, and rationalist, called it the light of speculative thought. Franz Anton Mesmer called it animal magnetism. Eliphas Levi called it the energy of the serpent. Vedic philosophers will refer to it as a kundalini. Um, You'll find references to this in Taoism. You'll find references in Kabbalah. You'll find more modern references under terms like vril, used by the occultist and novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton. And again and again and again, you find reference to some force, some X factor that drives the magical operation. I believe that X factor is sexuality. The other element of the magical operation that I think contributes to its results, if there are going to be any results at all, is a clarified wish. I believe it's extremely important for the individual to privately arrive at that clarified wish, which is not as simple as it may sound, because it seems to me that our wishes get taken from us all the time. They get taken from us by conventional religious thought that gets repeated almost by rote, era after era after era, that get that gets taken from us by concepts that say the world we live in isn't actually, it's illusory. It's not of any ultimate value. Again, as I was alluding earlier, it's Maya, it's samsara, it's illusion. What matters is what you can't see. What matters is the invisible. That we become hungry ghosts, getting caught up in chasing goodies and baubles, soap bubbles of the outer world, which we grab at like a little kid grabs at candy, stops crying for a little while. Then when the candy is gone, the kid starts crying again. You know, we've all heard this familiar critique. Not only is it familiar, it's been historically reasserted over millennia, although it reaches us in language that is not our own. It reaches us in translations of translations of translations, and then it gets repeated over and over and over. We see this happen all the time on social media. How many times does somebody on social media just reach for some off-the-shelf term or concept that all of us have heard of, that usually includes the phrase the universe, and then just tells us what to do. You know, you're not supposed to want this. You're supposed to want that. You're not supposed to be concerned with personality, whatever that is. You're supposed to be concerned with essence. You're supposed to be concerned with non-identification. You're supposed to be concerned with non-attachment. You find this in Christianity. You find this in Buddhism. You find it in many faiths, many perennial faiths. I question it. I question it. We often hear on the path that the seeker must verify everything for him or herself, but what that usually amounts to is the speaker is telling you to, go away, verify that everything I've said is right, and then when you've done that, come back. And if you come back and you haven't done that, go away again and try again. And keep trying, until you come back and have verified that I'm correct. I reject that. I reject that. Who is the person saying that? Does he or she read ancient Sumerian? Or is picking up ideas in translation of translation of translation, just like I am? Has he or she have experiences that can be summoned right here and right now? One of the things I disdain in our spiritual culture is the way in which you run into somebody at a party or at a reception or before a talk, and they immediately want to start telling you about their experiences, like somebody showing you their vacation photos or describing to you their dream. Who cares if that can't be summoned right now? Why am I bothering someone describing my memories of something that happened to me? Maybe it occurred. Wonderful. But is that available right now? And does that lend authority to the speaker to tell you what you should want and what you should think? I remember years ago, I was talking to a therapist who I liked very much, and I thought he was a 100% good guy. And he asked me something about what did I want from life, and I told him the truth. And he said to me, "But that's superficial." And I said to him, "Scott, how many years have you known me? You asked me a direct question. I'm giving you a direct response. How can that be superficial? I'm telling you the truth, insofar as my outlook." Now, we as a seeking community, as human beings in general, we tend, it seems to me, to internalize peer pressure. And in so doing, we sometimes call this internalized peer pressure conscience or ethics or insight. And it's nothing of the kind. It's nothing of the kind. I think that peer pressure gets its claws into us very, very early. Hence, one of the um, practices I suggest in the book is allowing yourself in private to peel back the layers of your psyche, your thought, to your earliest cognizant memories, your earliest long-term memories, say as far back as ages 3 or 4, because we do have memories from that time, and ask, what did you want then? It's not a it's not a slight thing to do. You know, you had a point of view. You had a point of view at that time, and I want you to know what it is. And it's not silly. It's not, oh, I wanted to be a ballerina or a cowboy. Um, it's something else. It's something else. And and look, if you wanted to be a ballerina or a cowboy, then that's great. Know that. Know that. But don't let peer pressure take these things from you, because it seems to me that by maybe age 9, or certainly by 10, peer pressure so has its claws in us that we can't, it's very hard for us to acknowledge our desires, wishes, needs, dreams, even to ourselves, because we filter it through the lens of peer pressure and we perfume it. We perfume it. We use terms like service or other terms that realign one's wishes in ways that may not be accurate. I'm not saying, I'm not trying to place a value per se on anything other than accuracy to yourself, intimate accuracy. And I keep saying, do this in private. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell your shrink. Don't tell your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or neighbor Mike or whatever, because they will take it from you. They will take it from you. They will argue with you. They will impel you to qualify it. They will dilute it. They will dilute it. We often hear, and I write about this in the book, that one of the laws of occultism is silence. And I've always known that's true, and I've always attempted to honor that, but I've never really understood why. Who cares? Why is silence powerful? What's the mechanism behind that? And as I was writing the book, it dawned on me, the mechanism occurred to me, at least as far as I'm capable of perceiving it. And it seems to me that we talk in order to dilute things. When we're suffering, maybe somebody's done something unfair, we might talk to a friend or a shrink or whomever, a fellowship member, because we're aiming to dilute the emotional pain and conflict of what occurred to us. And I think that dilution is real, and it's sometimes very necessary. Sometimes we need to air suffering. We need to. But the whole purpose of talking is to dispel something. Notice the word dispel. I didn't plan to use that word, but it's rooted in magic, right? And and talking dispels. Talking dispels. It seems to me there is some element of dispersal that occurs both extraphysically and psychologically. Psychologically, a sympathetic listener may be able to help relieve the pain that you're feeling from an event. But we don't want that passion to dissipate when it comes to magic. We may want that passion to dissipate, maybe, when it comes to suffering of some kind. And that may be necessary. That may be necessary. But we don't want to dispel that passion when it comes to magic. And we sure don't want our friends, save us from our friends, to show us how smart they are by taking the wish from us, qualifying it. We're saying, well, I'm not so sure, but what about, but, you're doing this because of service, or let the universe take its course. You don't need to intervene or whatever. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in the truth of your wish because I believe that focus, passion, persistence, sexual energy, and ritual put you on a pretty good track to accomplishing what you want. And lest there be any question about what I mean about words like accomplishment or achievement or what have you, it's all one thing as I see it. It's all one thing. Why should you or I or anybody else have to declare a difference between the so-called inner and the outer, the so-called higher and the lower? It's all relative. Everything that we describe, we speak in terms of time, we speak in terms of the universe, we speak in terms of things that we experience as reality. They're all just concepts. They're all just measurement. Time, what is time? Time is a device that we use to measure reality. We don't fully understand time. Even concepts like up and down, they're meaningless. They're meaningless. If I said up and point up, well, sure, we're all having a common understanding of what that means, but my up is not the up of somebody um, on this program this evening who's in Australia or New Zealand or Papua New Guinea. They got a whole different up, and their up is every bit as real as mine. And gravity and all the natural laws that we're talking about, they're terms, they're words that we use to measure things. I don't know what gravity is. Gravity is mass being attracted to itself, it seems to me. It's extraordinary and it's bizarre. Why is mass attracted to itself? Well, we wouldn't be alive in the way that's familiar to us if that wasn't the case, but that's a description, not a reason. So it's very important to me that we not get overly hung up on language, on familiarity. As I often say, familiarity is not truth. Familiarity is not truth. And a ritual that you undertake that brings you something uh, may very well succeed, requires no explanation to anybody, and anybody who expects an explanation is just using conceptual language. Show me ego. What is that? Show me personality. Show me essence. Show me inner. Show me outer. Show me attached. Show me non-attached. A teacher of mine who's now dead used to joke when we do something, manifest something, and we like it, we say, oh, that must be essence. And then when we don't like it, we say, oh, that must be personality. These are our hapless definitions in a way. So my wish is for a very finely defined notion of what you want, followed through by the causative ritual and approached with the warranted belief that it's going to work. Something is going to occur. It may not always be exactly what you want. It may not always be evident. It may not always be obvious, or something may not occur because there's a lot of countervailing laws and forces that we live under, as I've been describing. And these countervailing laws and forces, they have a claim on reality too. They have a claim on experience too. So it may be that it's the wrong time or something else is going on that needs to be dealt with. Or there may be cases in which countervailing forces are just overwhelming. If you're living under circumstances of warfare, that's overwhelming. The only law, it seems to me, is the law of survival. And if you're living under circumstances where your town happens to be located next to a active volcano and that volcano goes off, that's overwhelming. Again, the only law, it seems to me, becomes the law of survival. If you don't have clean water to drink, if you don't have good food to eat, if you're living under war or natural disaster, those are overwhelming countervailing conditions. This is why I never speak in terms of law of attraction or things of that nature. Not because I'm I'm averse to these things, but because I don't think that captures the complexity of laws and forces under which we live. A law of mental attraction or psychical attraction, it's not the only game in town. If it were the only game in town, it would provide almost a sole contradiction to natural laws as we experience them. A truth may be an ultimate truth, like consciousness may in fact be the ultimate arbiter of reality, but that truth is still conditioned in the world that I live in as we experience it. And you will find this expressed very plainly and very clearly in the fragments of Hermetic writing that have come down to us today. Ours is probably the first generation that has quality English translations of late ancient Hermetic literature. Fragments of it, fragments of it. And this late ancient literature states very plainly, I think, in the words, the translated words of our own ancient ancestors, in this case from Alexandria, where most Hermetic literature was produced in late antiquity, who say, yes, we do create as above, so below, or as Western scripture puts it, God created man in his own image. So it stands to reason that you, the individual, create, but you and I must abide the natural structure that we live in, even if it's not ultimate truth, even if it's not ultimate truth. So let's get down to the nitty gritty, because I want to give you practical exercises that you can employ almost immediately to test my thesis of whether magic can be boiled down to its absolute essentials. In light of what I've described to you, um, I would say that not only in light of what I've described, but in light of my own personal practice and experience, the single most powerful exercise I have found is one that might be termed, I'm borrowing a phrase from Napoleon Hill, sex transmutation. The idea of using the sexual drive as a ignition of events in the world, events that go beyond the typical sexual expression, which is physical pleasure or procreation, or both and. But that's not the final name of the game with sexuality, as I've been attempting to allude. As I think you'll find in Taoism, in Hermeticism, in Kabbalah, and in a very wide range of modern occult thought, including Eliphas Levi, P.B. Randolph, Aleister Crowley, and other modernist voices who were not occultists, such as Arthur Schopenhauer. Franz Anton Mesmer didn't consider himself an occultist, so I guess I'll honor that and group him in with Schopenhauer. But I think what you'll find is that the sexual urge properly channeled gets results in ways that go beyond physical expression, pleasure, release, and procreation. The fact is, and I believe you'll find this in the words of Socrates himself, and I get very specific about this in the book. Um, Symposium is the dialogue that I reference. I believe that the sexual urge is the expressive urge of life itself seeking replication. We experience this through procreation, but it exists everywhere and all at once. It's one of the most abundant and overlooked natural laws, it seems to me, or magical laws, if I may put it that way, uh, in, 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 in human expression from its earliest stage up to the present. And the harnessing of this sexual energy is simplicity itself. So here it is, and it's something for you to try. When you experience the sexual urge, sexual desire, Again, the usual way of satisfying that is through physical release. And what I'm going to describe to you doesn't in any way require abstention from sex. Um, I was saying this the other night to Duncan Trussell on his podcast, and Duncan said, "Oh no, don't tell me I can't jerk off anymore." And, no, relax. I'm not telling you that. You don't have to worry about sexuality or jerking off or anything else. You're not going to change your sexual life, other than for the better, I suspect. Um, at moments of your own choosing, in times and places of your own choosing, when you feel the sexual urge well up within you, through a mental shift, redirect that sexual urge away from physical satisfaction, which may or may not be possible at that time and place anyway, and direct it to a cherished task, whatever it is. Maybe a creative task, the completion of a work of art. It may be a very ordinary task, like, dare I say, completing your taxes. It may be a household task. It may be an athletic task. It may be a job interview. Whatever it is, redirect through a mental shift that sexual urge towards the task at hand, and you will find that you bring greater acumen, intelligence, enthusiasm, creativity, charisma to the task that you are attempting. Think about this. It seems to me that salesmen and actors are doing this all the time, all the time. When you look at an actor in a role, even if that role has no overt sexual quality to it at all, there's overwhelming likelihood that part of what I'm describing is at work in the charisma, the enthusiasm, the appeal, the summoning of emotion that that actor is capable of making. I believe this is this is the force at work behind the persuasive powers of great salespeople. Haven't you had the experience? I've certainly had this experience. I am a number one sucker of a salesperson trying to sell me something, and I know that he or she is trying to sell me something. I'm perfectly aware of that, and yet I like the person. I'm enjoying their company. I want them to like me. I am such a mark, you know, and and yet we all experience it. We all go through it, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're even sexually attracted to that person. You may not be sexually attracted to that person, but there's something about that person that you just kind of sort of like. And we call it charisma, or we call it, oh, I don't know, likability, or I dig them, or whatever it is. And next thing you know, you're buying the thing that you may or may not want, or may or may not need, and they have a hard job, salespeople. They eat what they kill. They're a lot like our Neanderthal ancestors, and and I don't think they would get damn near anywhere if they weren't capable of exuding that sexual energy, which is why sales work, whew, over email, forget about it. It's pretty tough. If you can show me a salesman who can sell stuff over email, I'll show you somebody that I'd love to hire if I was in a position to do that. But one-on-one, salespeople can be very sexual and it's very powerful, even if you're not overtly attracted to that person. I really want to ask you to make this effort. I think this effort has been experimented with and validated by a very, very wide range of extraordinary intellects, some of them not really known to have even necessarily existed, like Socrates, who comes to us through brilliant insight into the human situation, others of whom who are very recent and who very definitely did exist, ranging from P.B. Randolph to Wilhelm Reich to Aleister Crowley. There are simpler forms even of sex magic, if less um, available at any given moment. P.B. Randolph, the great mid-century um, occultist who lived in the United States, man of mixed black and white ancestry, brilliant thinker, uh, led a very tough life, committed suicide in Toledo, Ohio, in 1875. Tough life, Very, very, very tough life, but remarkable person. And Randolph felt that, and this was later voiced by Aleister Crowley and other intellects, other magical intellects, that you could also, at the time of a sexual climax, set an intention, set a goal, and could accomplish some of the same things. Now, Randolph, partly because of the era in which he was writing, I think was impelled to use Abrahamic theistic language and add caveats to his sex magic model, which I don't think we have to abide today. Like, for example, Randolph would say, well, this operation should really only be done by a man and a woman in a proper marriage, and it should only be for increasing agape or love, impersonal love in the outer world. I think Randolph was doing that because, frankly, he probably would have been thrown in prison or been brought up on charges of mail fraud if he had written in a more explicit way. And in fact, he was arrested and jailed for obscenity charges, and it it ruined his finances and probably contributed to his suicide. You know, we have to remember, I mean, these were real men and women who had the same concerns that every one of us have. It was horrible what was done to Randolph, and I think it forced him in his writing to tone down his language. Aleister Crowley, of course, knew no such impediments in his life and times, and he was more explicit, if also, I think, needlessly complex about the matter. But that is also something to experiment with. Set an intention at that very juncture of climax. Um, I don't really want to get ahead of things, but one might justly ask, why should any of that matter? Why on earth should setting an intention at the point of climax do anything other than just be a psychological exercise? Why should it do anything if I take the sexual urge and mentally shift its focus to completing a task? Why should that do anything? I believe very strongly, and I write about this in the book in great detail, as I've written about in previous books, including Daydream Believer, Modern Occultism, and other works. I believe that the psyche has selective faculties, not causative per se, but selective, insofar as it seems to me, and I'm going to explain this in real shorthand, and you'll have to forgive me because it's worthy of a whole evening in and of itself, and there are other things I want us to be able to discuss together. But it seems to me that if one fact has really emerged from our century of quantum mechanics, which is now turning into a century of quantum computing, and quantum computing hasn't even reached the public yet. And when it does, I think it's going to be an absolutely perceptual hurricane, a perceptual hurricane. I think there is a potentia or superposition or potentiality um, inherent in matter, in localism, that hinges upon the perception of you, the individual, and that perspective and perception may, in a very general sense, conditioned by other laws and forces, actualize experience. This is exactly what goes on in the particle lab, exactly what goes on in the particle lab, insofar as when we measure things with exquisitely fine instruments, we see more and more of what's going on, and more so, part of that seeing is that there is a potentia to objects at the subatomic level, but increasingly at higher levels of matter, including hydrogen molecules and buckyballs, which are clusters of electrons, and that only through measurement does an object have any real locality, isness, materialism at all. And more, um, first of all, this is being validated at the quantum uh, computing level, and it hasn't really reached the public yet because quantum computing is still very much in prototype stage, just as really AI is still in prototype stage. We talk about AI and we have access to AI, but it's really beta launches. It's soft launches. It's not what this stuff is supposed to look like once it really gets up and running. Those may be false promises, but we have to realize that we're not seeing AI exactly as its designers have presumably seen it, or so they claim. Now, dig this. Quantum computing hasn't even reached the public yet in terms of a beta launch, in terms of a soft launch. But late last year, in December of 2024, Google's engineers released a statement about their experiments with Google's quantum computing prototype, which is called Willow. And the engineers reported that they gave Willow a math problem to solve that was so complicated that the estimated time required to solve it would be 10 septillion years, or 10 to the 25th power, which is longer than the known or projected existence of the universe itself. And yet, Willow solved the problem, so we're told, in under 5 minutes. It's impossible. It's impossible, but real. And the engineers, in one of these extraordinary statements that people who aren't looking for evidence but who find evidence sometimes make, just noted this seems to provide credence to the theory that we're living in a multiverse. In other words, that Willow didn't solve the problem so much as Willow was able to pluck the answer from a different dimension or a different intersection of time, because how else did it work? 10 septillion years is an inconceivable amount of time. It's longer than the projected existence, so-called backwards and forwards, of the entire universe. So it's an impossible problem, but it was solved, so to speak, in under 5 minutes. So a plausible thesis is that the answer was plucked from another dimension. This is at the heart of what we call string theory, the idea that all of reality exists on these undulating bands of strings, and stuff is going on that we can't see in intersections of time and dimensions that we can't see with our current instrumentation. Our five senses are a very coarse means of measuring reality. There are means, but there are coarse means. And yet we have this quantum entanglement, which nobody can explain, which exceeds light speed, which is what Einstein somewhat derisively called spooky action at a distance. Well, string theory is a conceptual model intended to explain that. My contention is that our five senses, so to speak, our conventional five senses, of course, we have more than five senses, which ESP data alone tells us, something I write about in the book. But our conventional five senses, well, what else are they but instruments of measurement? Taste, touch, sight. How far away is that? Does this taste good? Is this too hot to touch? Is it cold out? I better get a coat. We measure things. How is that different from the tools of instrumentation used in the particle lab? It's really not. How is a photometer different, from my eyes? Well, a photometer interprets, my brain interprets. There's a raw reality there that any materialist should love. Um, but the fact is, you can't be a materialist and maintain your integrity by saying, that's right, right, we're moist robots. That's exactly right. Your eyes, complicated photometer, no different. Okay, fine. Look what the hell a photometer is doing. It actualizes particles where they weren't because someone took a measurement. Doesn't it doesn't it stand to reason that our five senses may be the same? This may be a logical necessity. So when I talk about selection, wish, the sexual act, this passion, this impassioned focus, I'm not speaking in these cute metaphors. I'm trying best I can to describe what's going on in my experience as a seeker. And It has been noted in parapsychology research of ESP, clairvoyance, telepathy. This is attributable to my intellectual hero, J.B. Rhine, who pioneered the Zener card tests in ESP at Duke University in the late 1920s, early 30s. J.B. made the observation, again, it wasn't evidence that he was looking for, but he just happened upon it. He made the observation that the emotional state that best produces occurrences of ESP is conviviality, enthusiasm, uh, a positive mood. And that he said he noticed that when a positive mood prevailed in the lab, results would spike. And that when boredom or fatigue set in, results would dip. And then if the test subject went out and had a cup of coffee, had a smoke, what have you, came back in, the results would spike again. In fact, this may make some of you very happy. He drew a direct correlation between ESP occurrence and ingestion of caffeine. So if you're addicted to caffeine, like I am, good. And and what is the sexual act but that moment of ultimate wonderful relaxation, which we sometimes look. Sexual climax is such that it is mysterious. It suddenly the weight of the world, the weight of our psychology is lifted, albeit momentarily. And I think that's one of the many reasons why the sexual act is so. Look, wars are fought over it. Wars are fought over it. It's one of the reasons why the sexual act is so valued by all of us. It's just that we use it too narrowly, it seems to me, and it occurs to me that rather than using sexuality, the sexual climax or urge, as a way of throwing off the weight of the world, allow in that which you want. That may have a very important, valuable, selective focus, which is why sex magic and sexuality is so critically important to magic. Another example would be sigil magic, which some of you have heard of and work with, but I will, in any case, venture a brief description of it because I think that this act of magic, pioneered by the early 20th century magician and artist Austin Osman Spare, I think did so much to simplify magic along the lines that Jack Parsons was wishing for. Sigil magic, as many of you know, goes like this. You you write out a sentence, a short, simple sentence of something that you want. Make it really clear, make it really basic. And then there are all kinds of different methods. You could cross out repeating letters, you could cross out vowels, you could cross out consonants, whatever. Cross out these letters. The way I do it nowadays is I cross out repeating letters, but there are different methods, all valid. You cross out repeating letters, and so you have alphabet soup. You just have a jumble of letters left that no longer form words. You then take those letters one by one and you create a sigil around it, which is sort of a magical looking symbol. I have one tattooed on the back of my neck. I'm going to show it to you. I don't know if you all could see that, but and then you make it into a magical looking symbol. The way Grant Morrison puts it that I really like is, make it magical. Have some fun with it. And then the idea is you bring yourself to climax over that symbol. Now, there are different ways of reaching this climax, so we're told, You can do it through dance. You can do it through meditation. You can do it through drugs if you take drugs. Or you can do it through jerking off over the symbol. I can assure you, 99.9% of the human race does it through that last method. So go right ahead. But if the other methods speak to you, then use them by all means. But bring yourself to climax over that symbol. And then the principle goes, forget all about it. And this is sometimes called chaos magic, and I like that term because it comports indirectly with chaos theory. And chaos theory teaches that it's sort of a system theory. If you if you make one particulate change to a system, you necessarily change everything. The ripple effects are demonstrably dramatic. And that is true. Look, for those of you who are programmers, I don't need to convince you that that's true. You know it's true. It's part of your everyday work. And it's quite remarkable. So you could practice sigil magic, for example, and you could be an atheist, you could be an agnostic, you could be a materialist, but you could agree with me that the changing of one aspect of experience necessarily changes everything. We don't really know where that's going to go. We don't know where that's going to go, but it's going to go somewhere. I think that's how Anton LaVey, an underrated magician, saw magic. Anton was neither explicitly atheistic nor explicitly theistic. He was too flexible in thought to belong with totality to either one of those categories. But he did prescribe ritual quite a bit. He didn't belabor questions of spirituality versus materiality, but I think he understood implicitly that the performance of the ritual itself was enough to set in motion this chaos ripple effect. Now, one of the tenets of sigil magic with which I have personally wrestled is that once you perform your ritual, you're to forget all about it. The outlook goes, and this is something specifically that Anton LaVey referenced, that the idea of the ritual, in this case, if you're reaching sexual climax, let's say over a sigil, is that it should burn all the passion out of your system, burn all the passion out of your system. And if that doesn't happen, then you go back and you repeat it until it does happen. And if you find that you're having difficulty forgetting about it, kind of washing your hands of the wish and allowing yourself the confidence or the satisfaction that it's been attained, he said, and I think this is valuable, the creative act can help you forget. The creative act can help you forget. Embark on something else. Why is it important to forget? I'm not always sure I've agreed with that. I suppose you could argue that it's important to forget about the wish because you don't want to dilute it. It has something to do with silence. I think you don't want to keep belaboring it and turning it around. You want to provide as little psychological architecture as possible so that the effort, this particulate change that you've made in the world, the effort can unfold in as unimpeded a fashion as possible. Um, I'm not certain that I'm convinced of that, but I honor that point of view. And if one wants to abide that point of view, then I think Anton's advice is good. Engage in a different creative act. It seems to me the only thing that ever saves us from suffering, and I look, some people would argue with me about this because this may contradict elements of Vedic thought, elements of Abrahamic thought, but it seems to me the thing that resolves suffering, and sometimes suffering is good. I mean, conscious suffering has a place and a role in, I think, paying for a person's existence. I think paying of debt, broadly defined. But substitution, that something else that comes along. I can remember instances, and I'm going to speak very plainly with you. I remember several years ago, um, I suffered an unrequited crush on another person, and I was crazy, 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 crazy in love with her, and it was completely unrequited, and you know what a fool and what an idiot, you feel yourself becoming when you're in that situation, but there's not a damn thing you can do about it. So fighting it is even stupider, and I knew this was going nowhere, and I would do tarot reading after tarot reading, to see if there had been some change in the weather, and that too reached the point of just pure idiocy, where it's like, look, at a certain point, the death card means what it says. and it's foolish to keep trying to wring water out of a stone. But rationality doesn't matter when you feel in love or infatuation or sexual urge or whatever. Rationality is, it's like pitting a hamster wheel against a nuclear turbine. It's just never going to work, you know. And so by, I don't know, by happenstance, by design, whatever, I met someone else. And this other person um, was someone who I immediately fell very infatuated with. You know, I'm that way. And she drove me crazy. Very manipulative kind of person. But I was glad because even though I was getting driven crazy by the new manipulative relationship that I was in, it helped me forget the old one, and I've never looked back on it. Now, that relationship too gave way to a much more positive and healthy and good relationship, but it was necessary and it was a helpful bridge because that act of substitution eased the pain that I was feeling and the attachment that was going abso-fucking-lutely nowhere. And I'm sure many of you on this program tonight have had similar experiences. I guess what I'm trying to get across to you is what Anton LaVey was saying, which is that if you perform the magical act and you abide the idea that forgetting about the wish when you're doing sigil work is necessary, if very unnatural and difficult, substitute something in its place. Embark on a new creative act that may help with the forgetting. I want to give you another exercise, and I'm trying to be mindful of the time because I could stay here forever, but you know, you guys may have children to pick up or other things that are necessary. But I do want to give at least one more exercise before I start to open things up to exchange. I referenced earlier the selective capacities of the psyche, the realizations that not only quantum mechanics, but now quantum computing are bringing to our world. I tell these career skeptics, if you're sick and tired of woo-woo people like me talking about quantum mechanics, rest easy. You'll never hear about it again. I'm going to start talking about quantum computing. And once that train starts going, nothing is going to stop it because the realities that quantum computing is going to unfold to us, I suspect, are going to hasten the demise of uh, philosophical materialism and strict physicalism in such a way that these things are going to seem as anachronistic as, you know, whalebone corsets by the time the next generation starts to rise. Um, One of the things I've been very interested in is whether we, as a seeking public, are capable of translating insights from material, let's say, to cognition. What's the bridge? What's the bridge between uh, 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 the material and the cognitive in terms of the observations that I'm sharing with you? I would say perhaps the bridge is not even necessary. Perhaps the bridge is intrinsic because the two topics are one and the same insofar as observation localizes. But one of the efforts that was made to draw out some of these extraordinary quantum realities into the field of cognition was undertaken by a clinical psychologist at Cornell University, Darrell Bem, who I've written about quite a bit and who I admire hugely. Bem in 2011 issued a paper that was the result of a decade-long study into precognition and into what is called retrocausality, the idea of events and things and stuff traveling backwards in perceived time. I say perceived time because time is, as I alluded earlier, nothing but a measurement device. We don't know what time is. We measure it and then we call the device the thing itself. This is what in Zen Buddhism is called the problem of um, the finger pointing at the moon. It is not the moon, right? It's just indicating that something is there. But and this concept of retrocausality, I want to be very clear with you. It's not just a concept that one hears about within parapsychology circles, but it's a concept that's very widely considered within quantum mechanics itself. the physicist, the great physicist Richard Feynman, who was a critic of everything I'm describing tonight. And I wish Feynman was still alive, because if he was, I think his criticism would have slackened. I really do. He was a lovely man, but he was very influenced by career skeptics at Caltech. He was too great an intellect to be in that company. He was such a beautiful man. I wish he was with us today. But Feynman in 1965 won the Nobel Prize in Physics for discovery of what is called the positron, which is an electron basically that reverses in time and flips its charge. It was there, and then it's there, and then it's back there. It's absolutely mind-blowing, but for the fact that it's empirically as real as the words I am now speaking. And this question of retrocausality is verboten in classical physics. You'll hear people say, correctly, that it violates Einstein's second law of thermodynamics, which is that something cannot, of its own volition, just return to a previous state. You can't unbreak an egg. You know, that's a pretty good metaphor for the second law of thermodynamics. And that's true in classical physics. That is not true in terms of quantum physics, in terms of 20 and 21st century physics. Retrocausality is a concept that is dealt with and must be dealt with as a logical necessity, in as much as Einstein's special theory of relativity is. And the special theory of relativity, among other things, is what has taught us that linear time is not ultimate reality. It is not reality. It is a necessary device that we conventionally conceived of five sensory beings must use to navigate life. I have to respect linearity. If I'm supposed to be on this session with you at 5 p.m. Eastern Time and I don't show up, it causes chaos. I've got to show up. I've got to abide it. But it's not real. It's not real in any remotely ultimate sense. Einstein demonstrated, for example, that for for an observer, time slows down in conditions of either extreme gravity, like a black hole, or conditions of extreme velocity, like the mythical spaceship moving at or near light speed. And the astronaut on that spaceship, he or she doesn't feel any different. They're not like the guy at the end of 2001 where it's like, whoa, this is so freaky. Life just goes on. But for the observer, that person is aging more slowly, and that is actual. That is actually true. We know this because astronauts in our own era, while they're moving nowhere near the velocity of light speed, they do experience minute but measurable reductions in the aging process. These are facts. Linear time is not an ultimate reality. So what Bem decided to attempt in his parapsychology experiments was not only a statistical measure of precognition, but in his final experiments, experiments 8 and 9, he attempted to determine whether doing something in the so-called future could impact events in the so-called present. It sounds absolutely topsy-turvy, surreal, ridiculous even, but for the fact that it's real. What Bem did in his experiments, these were the latter two experiments in his 10-year study, is he asked individuals, subjects, to memorize a list of words and then to recite back the words they could remember. And you could imagine the results were pretty ordinary. You know, you memorize a list of 10 words, you recite back 5 or 6, something of that nature. Then he added a different wrinkle to the exercise in which he would ask participants to continue studying, to again encounter a list of words, memorize a list of words, repeat back that they could remember, but with a different wrinkle, which is that you continue studying your word list into the future. You just keep doing it. You just keep doing it. And he found that once you added that wrinkle, scores spiked by about 2% in the present. It was a backwards causation, a retrocausal effect. He published these experiments in a very prominent and well-regarded, juried psychology journal, and he was excoriated. He was held up to ridicule in the New York Times and on Wikipedia and in Slate magazine, which dedicated a whole article to what a nut job the august intellects at Slate regard parapsychologists like Daryl Bem. But I didn't start writing about Daryl's results until about 10 years later, and that was lucky because in the ensuing 10 years, his results were proven confirmatory in a meta-analysis, an analysis of pooled data, which included uh, 90 experiments in 33 different labs in 14 different nations. And the result was confirmatory, belying the fiction, the long-standing fiction that results from the ESP lab have proven non-replicatory. That is a shibboleth. That is a fiction. And BEM is only one example among many that upend that fiction. What I described to you is remarkable because the social sciences face a real crisis in fraud and replicability. I would say that one of the reasons the social sciences face this dual crisis is that they have no laws. Sociology has no laws, psychology has no laws. I'm not sure. Anthropology, I guess one could debate that. I don't think it has laws. I would say there are laws in the field of parapsychology, which I'll go on in a different presentation, but I write about them in Practical Magick. So if you have the book, you can read about it in there. But the fact is, the sample size of this meta-analysis was very, very large. This thing has been confirmed with a larger sample size that has probably been applied to some of the prescription drugs that you and I are going to take tonight or tomorrow morning, I can assure you. And that ought to give us a little pause. The fact is, BEM's material is bulletproof. It is bulletproof as far as cognition is concerned. Can it be extrapolated to fields other than cognition? I will give you an example of something, and then I think I'm going to wrap up because it's getting a little late, and I want us to have time for exchange. And I cite two examples in the book. I'll give you one example now, which is the briefer of the two, but they're both good. The briefer one is this: a friend of mine here in New York City was looking for work, and she was in very serious need of work. And she was interviewing with a particular religious organization that was hiring, and she really wanted the job, and she felt just extremely well suited for it. She knew this was her forte, and she was very excited and she was very happy about it. But for whatever reason, it didn't come through. The job fell through, and the boss man wrote to her and said, "Look, I'm very sorry, but we went with this other guy." And she was very crestfallen and disappointed. And she reached out to me and said, "Do you have any recommendations?" And I said, "Well, look," I described to her more or less what I've been describing to you about the verity of retrocausality. And I said, "Here's an experiment to try. It's just something to try. Keep prepping for this other job. Keep prepping for this other job that you wanted so bad. Whatever you're doing for the interview, whatever your prep work was, continue it, and keep applying for other jobs. You know, we have to row the boat of circumstance in this world that we live in." So she kept applying for other jobs intelligently, but she also took the approach of continuing prep for that job that she wanted. And all I can tell you is this, and you can find it in the book. And if anybody doubts me, I'll show you the emails. Um, she writes to me about a week later, ecstatic, over the moon, and she said, "Oh my God, the boss man wrote back to me and he said another opening, very, very similar to the one that I was going for, just um, came up, only this one has even more hours than the other one had, which I need." And he said, "Hey, you know, I said you couldn't have this position, but look, it's this new thing just opened very close, has more hours. Would you like it?" And she said, "Yes." You know, she was ecstatic. She was thrilled. She's working in this organization today. I saw her there at an exhibit maybe about 4 months ago. And it's all in the book. May have happened anyway, may have been coincidence, may have been happenstance. I don't know. But it's an experiment. It's something to try. I refer to a Thai kickboxing match in the book where I was contacted by someone. Actually, I want to give you the Thai kickboxing exercise because it has another wrinkle to it that I think you'll find useful. So I'm going to add that too. A couple of years ago, a champion Thai kickboxer named Spencer Hanley. His fights are all over YouTube. You can throw them into Google and find his fights. Spencer reached out to me and he said he had a championship match outside of Austin, about 9 days away. And he was happy with the way his training had gone, but he wanted something that could help keep him on his mental game. What could I recommend? And so I recommended to Spencer something that you'll find in the book and something that you all might know about in other things that I've done or talked about, and that is the 30-day mental challenge. In short, the 30-day mental challenge is really just a contract you make with yourself to keep your thoughts in the direction of what is positive, what is advancing, what is constructive, what is productive for 30 days. That's it. That's it. It doesn't tell you what to think, what to do, what to value, but just keep your mind focused in constructive, productive ways for 30 days. And he wrote back and said, "Look, I'm going to do that, but you understand my match is 9 days away, so I need something more short term." And I said to him, "That is short term. That is short term." And I explained to him, as I have to y'all, uh, Bem's findings and the prospect of retrocausality. Bem's findings were in areas of cognition, but I see no reason why it shouldn't be applicable to physicality, to athleticism, which in a way is a form of cognition, motor skill. And and I said to him, "Look, I'll guarantee you, nobody in your opponent's coaching staff is talking to him about retrocausality. I guarantee you. You do this 30-day exercise and you keep doing it after that match ends. You've asked me for something that will help you stay on your mental game. Okay, this is your mental game. You keep doing that after that match is over. And we're we're taking the gambit that there is a retrocausal effect that will reach back and help you in that match. Well, did it? I don't know. He won the match. He came out. He looked great. He was very relaxed. I mean, totally at ease. Um, I don't know why. He came in the ring. He was wearing like this Hawaiian lei, and he looked very relaxed and chill. He was very respectful to his opponent, but he dominated the fight from the very beginning. Now, dig this. Um, Most of the time at mixed martial arts matches or boxing or whatever, kickboxing, the fighter gets to choose his or her own entry music, and very often that music will be some ear-bleeding heavy metal or drill rap or something like that. He came out to the song "Heaven Is a Place on Earth," and one of the announcers at ringside, you can find this on YouTube. One of the announcers at ringside said, "The fact that he's coming out to Belinda Carlisle makes me so happy." And I've always loved that song. I was gonna, I've, anyway, I have some history with that song. But the fact is, days later, without my ever having written about it, talked about it, told anyone about it, nothing, zero, nada, I get two audio voicemails over my DMs on Instagram from someone I had never met before, but had a crush on since I've been 17, Belinda Carlisle. And she says, "I just want you to know I'm a fan. I really enjoyed your book, Daydream Believer. I'm reading on certain places. I dig your work, and blah, 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 blah." Like, I'm about to get hysterical with joy here because, I mean, this has been, my star crush since I've been 17 years old, Jones Beach Theater. Um, and, um, and I had never told anybody. I didn't say anything to anybody. So it was a weird choice and a lovely choice that Spencer made coming out to Heaven is a Place on Earth And the announcer noticed it. He said something, and then I hear from Belinda like days later on my voicemail, and it was freaky. I can't tell you that any of this wouldn't happen anyway. I can't tell you that, oh, I'm quite sure of the cause and effect. I'm not. But it was weird and wonderful and worthy of experiment, worthy of experiment. So if there's something you want in life, whatever it is, and whether or not you've gotten a yes, a no, or no answer whatsoever, keep going after the fact, keep going after the fact. Gurdjieff used the term unflinching perseverance, unflinching perseverance. And we all think like, sure, persistence is a virtue if what you're persisting towards is positive and reasonable, sure. But there is a magical, perhaps unseen, extra linear, extra physical quality to all this, interdimensional quality. Something reaches backwards. We know this in cognition. The question is, what about in physicality? What about in life opportunities? What about in myriad other areas? I ask you to do this exercise not only because I think it is effective, and I dedicate a full chapter to it in the book, and I think it's the best thing I've ever written on this particular topic, but because of one point on which I'm going to end. Um, William James made the observation, which I think has since been validated in other fields, that belief in something uh, increases its impact. What else is the placebo effect, for example, than hopeful expectancy? Hopeful expectancy seems to be the trigger that generates a therapeutic response, if any occurs at all. What is the correlation, the mood correlation to occurrence of ESP? Well, conviviality, belief in the possibility of ESP, an atmosphere of comity prevailing in the lab setting. These were J.B. Rhine's observations. Charles Honorton, a second generation parapsychologist following J.B., made the equally compelling observation through a very wide range of juried and vetted experiments that deep relaxation, hypnagogia, that deeply relaxed state we experience just before drifting to sleep, deep relaxation, sensory deprivation correlates correlates to the ESP effect or the telepathic uh, occurrence. So from James onward and through myriad fields, of which I've only cited a few, the notion that belief increases impact is recognized and valid. And it seems to me that some of the data that I've tried to provide you with, which I footnote, reference, and go into greater detail about in the book, provides you with warranted belief in the efficacy of the magical appeal, the petitionary appeal, the causative ritual. You, if you share my belief in these things, I say to you, it is a warranted belief. It's not just faith, a word I've always found sort of squishy and never really liked. What is faith? I sort of define faith as, well, I suppose you could say persistence. I suppose you could say hope. I'm not even quite sure I understand what hope means. It feels like there's a desperation in that term. But warranted belief, which I hope I've there I go using that term. Warranted. I have to speak in generalities, or communication becomes very difficult. I should say that. But warranted belief, which I trust has been validated by some of the examples that I've given you, will increase in your life the impact of some of the processes that I have been describing. So it is with that warranted belief that I suggest to you going forward and trying these things and seeing the results and this is the birthright of all of us because as we began the talk with that beautiful, beautiful term, seeker. We are all seekers. We are all experimenters on the road of life. And the deepest wish that I have for everyone viewing this tonight uh, is that those experiments bear fruit, which I feel certain that they will. And I thank you all so much for being here and for joining me, taking time out of what I know are busy schedules. And I want to open things up to questions and exchange.
Thank you so much, Mitch. Yes, we have several questions and comments. The first one is from B. Earl. Hey, Ben. How many rewrites did you have to go through to get to your final manuscript?
Oh, the rewriting was very, very, very intense. Writing is rewriting. Writing is revision. I couldn't quite say how many I went through, but I went through the process with great intensity. Um, I mean, I changed the prescription in my glasses. I had to I had to up my prescription a little bit, if that gives you an idea of how intensively I stare at a screen all day. There's only so many times, you could run through your ink cartridge and run through paper. So most of the rewriting I do is on the screen. I do recommend to people who write, not only is rewriting not only is revision writing, but vary your mediums. Sometimes it's necessary to write on your screen. Sometimes it's necessary to revise with pen in hand using a piece of paper. You can use the voice function on Microsoft Word, which seems to be getting worse, not better. I'm not entirely sure why. The voices they have all sound mechanical and awful. Um, but it is helpful sometimes to hear rather than just to keep going back to the page. You can also send chapters or your manuscript to yourself on your phone, look at it on your phone, because varying the medium can be very helpful. You will catch things that the eye has otherwise missed. Stay away from AI when it comes to writing. We will all become just reduced to jellyfish if we allow AI to take over the writing function. But revision is your friend as a writer. It's a tough friend, but it must be abided. I couldn't even tell you how many times, but it was many, many, many multiples.
Great, thank you. Next question is from Mix Mamano. In many magical religious traditions, there is a belief that what is, quote, broken on this side is made, quote, whole on the other, a prophet's physical blindness for spiritual sight, etc. So when it comes to words, could it be that unbroken silence slash secrecy on this side means the fullness slash potency of words on the other?
That's a beautiful, beautiful insight. And I very much appreciate that. I've never heard it put that way before, and I like that very much. I write a lot about this question of compensation, reciprocity, what is sometimes called karma in Vedic tradition, although I don't like to use the word karma because that's a very, very vast impersonal subject, which I honor far too much to want to reduce it into a kind of talking point. We in the West need our own insights. And I am very convinced of this question of payment, of reciprocity, of compensation. I was saying earlier that conscious suffering is a sort of payment for one's existence. That's a term that was used by Gurdjieff. I do believe life is compensatory in some ways, even though we witness cruelties and tragedies all the time that appear not to be. And that may be part of the mix as well. Again, I cannot hasten often enough to talk about the multiplicity of laws that we live under and the way that these laws affect one another. But I think what you've hit upon is very, 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 very valuable. Um, People sometimes get frightened of asking for something in the magical act that they want. Uh, they think of the hallowed expression, which is rooted in Goethe, careful what you wish for, you just might get it. It's a worthy warning, but I think sometimes we get overly fearful of asking for things, and I occasionally will remind people there is payment for everything. There is payment for everything, as you're alluding in your wonderful observation. But sometimes that payment is made in advance. Sometimes you've already made that payment. So the blind prophet, for example, who may have some sort of precognitive vision or some sort of foresightful power. Uh, Maybe on the other side that compensates for the blindness on this side, and we never see it. Maybe even the prophet, him or herself, doesn't see it or realize it, but maybe that's real. It does seem to me that payment is necessary, but that shouldn't frighten us. It's just part of life. And sometimes that payment comes beforehand, which I think is what the commenter is describing. Very beautiful observation.
Thank you. Next question is from Robert Boliter, asking, the moment of sexual climax and setting intention will override ingrained belief systems / barriers?
Oh, I believe that's very possible. I have never used that moment to override uh, barriers or ingrained belief systems so much as I have used that moment to posit uh, attainment, outcome in things that I cherish, that are very important to me. But I think what you're saying, it stands to reason that we're really both um, proposing the same thing. I think that self-reconditioning can occur with climax, as self-reconditioning can occur during the state of hypnagogia, that exquisitely relaxed state that occurs just before we drift to sleep at night, and that reoccurs with some differences just as we come to in the morning. Brain scientists, neurologists have been neuroscientists have been studying the state of hypnagogia, not enough, and with great confusion. And the confusion is it's neither a sleep state nor it's a waking state. The individual during hypnagogia can experience hallucinations, oral, visual, bodily paralysis. It has all the hallmarks of sleep. And yet, cognition is present, so you can direct your thoughts. And I think that that's prime times for self reconditioning. It was proven to be prime time for telepathy by Charles Honorton, whose experiments I write about in Daydream Believer, Modern Occultism, to some extent too in Practical Magick. But yes, I would give a big affirmation and thumbs up to that proposition.
Okay. So once again, we have Mix Momano asking, accessing magic through a more simplified yet more potent sets of mechanisms is
Hmm.
definitely appealing. So if urgency creates a necessary potency to magic, what's the difference between urgency and desperation? In many magical belief systems, desperation seems to be a force of negation of your magical workings. So what does it mean to utilize urgency over desperation, and how does it relate to the potency that can be accessed in sexual urge?
Well, that's a wonderful question, and I venture I don't think we should be afraid of desperation. I really don't. And I think that desperation and urgency are probably close cousins, very close cousins. And one of the things I write about in the book, which I did not talk about tonight, is something that I call spontaneous deity petition. I do believe in the petitionary appeal to deity. Whatever one's definitions of that, whatever one's selections of that, apropos of what I was describing about our Neanderthal ancestors who seemed to appeal to deity or extra-physical intellect in the form of the Venus figurines, and certainly we've seen this in every religious expression the world over ever since. I do think that these relationships um, can be formed. They may be interdimensional. They may be from different intersections of time. They may cross over into other disciplines and studies. But I think that the petitionary appeal to the extra-physical agency is available to us. Our ancestors from time immemorial, literally, have identified and then personified intelligences in nature. And it seems to me that these intelligences, which go under a vast catalog of different names, and this is true from a polytheistic perspective, this is true from a monotheistic perspective, and I'm not so sure those two I mean, they may very well intermingle. Certainly they seem to in the Hindu religion. Um, it seems to me that these extra physical intelligences um, are themselves, like any intelligence must be, possessed of some kind of emotive component. Um, every description of the gods that we've ever gotten uh, makes them sound a lot like us. They have rage, they have jealousy, they have cowardice, they have heroism, um, they have grudges, they have moments of deep and sublime love, they have moments of impassioned hatred. They are sometimes ethical, they are sometimes unscrupulous. But all these things, ethics in particular, they arise from the fineness of emotion. And it seems to me that the realness of the petitionary relationship, petitionary appeal to deity, um, is actual, is real, and that in moments of desperation or urgency, a person can fall to his or her knees and make one of those appeals. And another thing you'll find in religion from time immemorial is that humanity has been bargaining with the gods forever. And you see this throughout scripture. You see this throughout Jewish scripture, Hebrew scripture. You know, please, bring rain to water these arid fields, and I promise I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. We're all familiar with this. We, we human beings have been striking bargains with deity since the dawn of time. There's a commerce almost between us, in the same way that there is among us as material human beings. So I don't think we should be afraid of desperation. We're all going to feel desperate at one time or another. One of my critiques of New Thought is that the the injunction to enter into the feeling state is flawed insofar as that feeling state may be one of extreme fear, for example, may be one of desperation. And again, pitting thought against emotion is like pitting the proverbial hamster wheel against the nuclear turbine. I mean, there's just no contest. The nuclear turbine is going to win out every time. So I can't talk myself into a state. Now, a master thespian might be able to do that, like my hero Neville Goddard, tattooed over here. Neville was a dancer, was a performer, was an actor. He may have had a unique gift or a distinctive gift to transform emotional states. He may not have always realized that everyday people like me don't have that same gift. And so we have to sometimes deal with desperation on its own terms. And I think we mustn't be afraid of that. I don't think Mother Nature played a cruel trick on us where magic abandons us at the moment of deepest need. And I think that that's why the petitionary appeal is so important.
Great, great. Thank you. Next, we have lovely comment from Whitney Dane. As always, deep gratitude to Mitch for showing such rare candor and authenticity, even in moments of personal vulnerability. There's something
Thank you.
profoundly refreshing about encountering someone whose word and character you can genuinely trust. A rare fortune indeed. Thank you,
Appreciate
Whitney.
that enormously. Thank you. Thank you.
And next we have two questions from Adrienne that are both about technology. Perhaps they could be taken together.
Mhm.
Do you think the use of technology amplifies or minimizes the potential effect of practical magic? And couldn't the use of algorithms be considered a form of dark magic as it seeks to control others without their knowledge or consent?
Wonderful questions and observations, and I speak, I would say yes in the plainest terms to both of those propositions. It's really funny. I remember 10 years ago, people would ask me about technology and magic, and the question or the topic left me cold. It just wasn't something that I felt strongly about. I thought, well, look, going back a decade, in terms of digital technology, it seemed to me, look, it's just another set of pipes, right? Humanity used to read books or used to use song or dance or oral tradition, and now we use the internet. Big deal, just another set of pipes. And I don't feel that way anymore because the advent of quantum computing is, without looking to, affirming interdimensionality. It's just incredible. I think when quantum computing starts to reach the public, weird things are going to happen. And I think it's going to be very interesting. And uh, invocation of the algorithm, yes, I think it is a form of manipulation. I mean, ultimately, it's to get us to buy stuff. We're buying stuff, I suppose, every time we give away our attention to advertisements or what have you. The whole gambit of social media is they can figure out my DNA and figure out ways to keep me on the damn hook. And as long as I'm on the hook, I'm looking at ads for things I don't need and never wanted until I saw the damn ad, and then I buy the thing. And so it goes. But I agree with your insight. I think it's absolutely correct. One thing I will say about algorithms and such, and I often say this to people, a lot of people have problems with self-image, and they want to know, what can I do? How can I deal with this? Stop trash talking online. The insulting language that we use online, the sarcasm, the rhetorical questions, the body shaming, the know-it-allism, the foolish confidence that someone derives from having heard something somewhere and they repeat it online. It's ridiculous. And it causes anger in other people, and that anger then gets taken out in a cycle effect. And as I've said elsewhere, we got to stop blaming bad guys, for this. I'm the bad guy. I have to stop doing it. There's no algorithm that's going to rescue us, and there's no big daddy that's going to rescue us. And no matter how many times we curse out Elon or Zuck, it's not going to rescue us. We have to stop this god awful trash talking online. It is killing our civilization. It's terrible. We're not sufficiently developed as people to have mature access to this 24/7 open mic that is social media. I'm not saying that people should be less critical. If there are policies that you hate, political figures that you hate, right on, make your views known. But as entertainment, trash talk is disgusting, and it does create shame in the individual, which gets sublimated by just going back to the bottle and taking another hit, so to speak, and it causes other people to suffer. I tell people and I challenge people, try it for an hour, 1 hour, desist from trash talking and see if you don't stand taller. Is your life worth a 1 hour experiment? Um, but I really appreciate your your observation because I feel a lot more strongly today about the link between spirituality and technology than I did 10 years ago.
Great, thank you. Next, we have a question from Linda. Does Mitch have any comment on the telepathy tapes by Diane Hennessy Powell?
Thank you, and I have been asked that quite a bit. My listening time is so limited. I've listened to one or two episodes, and I have to get back to it, and I just can't comment until I've heard the whole thing. But I'm always glad to see a parapsychological topic attract public attention. For those of you who are interested, I have a podcast on ESP research called Extraordinary Evidence. ESP is real. It's free. It's on Apple. It's on Spotify, etc. It's 6 episodes, actually seven, because the last episode is a two-parter, and I go through the historical evidence for ESP, but also the pathos of the men and women who gathered this evidence, whose careers usually caused calumny to rain down on them. And there's a lot of human drama in that story. Anyway, I'm proud of it, and I hope some of you guys will listen to it. And bravo to the telepathy tapes for bringing parapsychology as a subject back to the public for. I will comment on it when I've had a chance to listen to the whole thing.
Great, great. Uh, Next, Brian Lobato asks, is there I think they're trying to find a bookstore that sells your that you've been talking about.
Oh, okay. My signal is a little disrupted, so you'll forgive me. But I think I heard the question about a bookstore. Well, the PRS bookstore sells it, so that's a good independent bookstore. If you're not in Southern Cali, you can order it. Any bookstore at all can order the book through Ingram. And if you have any problems, just email me. I put my real email up on my website. I don't like people hiding from the public or posting emails that nobody reads. You go to my website, mitchhorowitz.com. My email is there. same one that the power company uses. So if you don't feel like buying the book from a struggling little startup like Amazon, you can buy it at just about any chain or indie store, or they can order it for you through Ingram. And of course, you can buy it through PRS. And again, if for whatever strange reason none of that works, just email me and we'll figure it out.
I think
Okay,
Kristen is
great.
frozen.
Next
Okay.
question is
Oh,
from
yeah.
Frankie Everly asking, what is the symbol? Oh, am I back?
Yeah. Well, I can hear your voice.
Hello.
Your image is frozen, and I hear Sarah loud and clear.
Well, Frankie was asking what symbol on the back of the bird on the cover of Practical Magick.
Oh, yeah, the symbol. That is an adapted symbol from a group called the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. I have a tattoo of it over here, if you can see that. Um, Actually, that symbol that's on the cover of the book is pretty accurate. Pretty accurate to the original late 19th century symbol. Mine is a little more adapted only because the tattoo artist couldn't fit in just everything. The Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor is I suppose it could be called a kind of an offshoot from the Theosophical Society, founded by members who wanted teaching in the Western magical tradition and the Hermetic tradition. But as I was alluding earlier in the program, Madame Blavatsky got a good deal more interested in Vedism and Buddhism in the late 1870s, and the emphasis on Western magic, Western occultism, Hermeticism grew more slack within her world. So some were frustrated by that, and they wanted teaching in practical magic. So the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, which is a very mysterious group, for a long time, not even their name was known. They went by the initials HB of L, and they were just known for years and years as HB of L. And then later it was discovered that that stood for Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. But I feel a sense of affection and commonality with that group as seekers who wanted teaching in practical magic in an age where Madame Blavatsky's interests were shifting somewhat. And so, as tribute, I asked the publisher who complied to use that symbol on the cover. I probably should have said something about that in the book, and I didn't. That's why there are anniversary editions. Now, again, I see Kristen is frozen. Um, so maybe
Great.
Sarah can speak, or
Yeah, I think there are just like a couple of comments. Ben said, "Thank you again so much for this wonderful talk. I have to
thank you.
make my exit and take my doggy for a walk. Have a lovely evening, and as always, a huge thank you to PRS for these fantastic online workshops and
Thank you.
lectures."
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Then Robert says, "Mitch, thank you, very an interesting and thought-provoking session. I learned some new ways of thinking and approaching reality."
Thank you.
Then Sandra, "Thank you very much for this very illuminating talk, Mitch. I deeply appreciate your books and your work. It is so very helpful to me. Thank you also, PRS, for supporting this excellent workshop. I also need to depart for the evening. Thank you again." So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Much appreciated. If anybody had a question that we didn't get to tonight, as I said, you can email me and I will get back to you. I ask only that you abide brevity because there's only so many emails that I can get through. But I'm always very happy to hear from readers with questions. So feel free to reach out to me if there's something that I didn't answer. And again, I'm very grateful to PRS, to Kristen and Sarah, and to all of you for participating. I know your schedules are very crowded, and that you would take the time out for an event like this is very meaningful to me. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you so much for being here today and taking the time to share your wisdom with us and talk about the new book. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure, pleasure. I'll see you all again soon.
All right, see you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
Good night.
everybody. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.